You are listening to Realign Your Life podcast, where I discuss with you strategies on how to realign your life and move towards the direction you always want to. I am Vivian, the host of this podcast, and every week I will bring value on how to improve and realign your life either through a guest or my thoughts. I can't wait to share what we have this week. It's time to realign your life. Well, hello there, and welcome back to Realign Your Life podcast. This is Vivian, the host of this show, and I am so excited and absolutely honored to have you join us with this episode today. Well, as I always promise you, I've got some interesting information for you today, and it's not going to be coming from me. No, I've got a wonderful guest, and I tell you what, you are going to be blown away with the information that he will share with you today. So I want to welcome to Realign Your Life podcast, my homeboy. I want to call him Dr. Ronald Harrill because he is a doctor and he is a philosopher and he is a historian in this particular area. So welcome, Ronald. Welcome to Realign Your Life podcast.
Well, thank you so much, Vivian. And I bring you greetings from your hometown, Shelby, North Carolina.
Shelby, North Carolina. Yes, yes. You know, we used to have that slogan of the city of pleasant living.
Yes, the CPL.
Yes.
But it's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, I am quite honored that you are here. And I think that the information that I know that the information that you will be sharing with our listening audience today is going to be powerful. And as a lover of the Word of God and a believer, I just think it is so important for us to know what it is that what we are reading, and also what our heritage is as people of color. So for you, for those of you that are out there listening, let me give you a little tidbit of some of the honors that this man has. So he is a heavy hitter here. He is a graduate of one of our HBCUs right here in North Carolina, A&T. Go Aggies, huh? And he is a member of Iota Phi Theta fraternity. So, we have a little competition going there with our Pratt brothers here. But anyway, Ronald has been recognized by many organizations. He goes about and he is available for speaking opportunities. And don't worry, we're going to give you all of that information on how to contact him. He's the author of several books and really over 200 poems he has written. He was recently honored by the United Way of Cleveland County, where Shelby is located, with the Scott Franklin Commitment to Impact Award. So that's very powerful, knowing that you are being commended and recognized by the people, in your hometown. He's a historian, an author, a lecturer, and most importantly, he is a husband and he is a dad to 3 wonderful sons. So I am going to stop all of my yakking and I'm going to let Ronald share some of his tidbits with you. So,
yes,
what you want them to know about you.
Well, thank you, Vivian. I appreciate your introductory there. Yes, I'm an author and a lecturer, and I've been on this journey of researching our history ever since I left North Carolina A&T. So that was 1973. So I've been on this journey 45 to 50 years. And I research. Now, my specialty is, even though I research all the aspects of our history, because we have at least 8,000 years of recorded history. And a lot of people dwell in the last 500 years of our history since we've been in America, and we concentrate on up from slavery and things like that. But in the big picture, I concentrate on the breadth of those wonderful 8,000 years. And my research has taken me to West Africa, to places like Senegal and the Gambia. In the Gambia, I spent a whole day with Kunta Kinte's family. That was really, really, really nice to spend that time with the Kintes. And I've been to North Africa also. So I'm always, Vivian, it's a passion with me. This is something, and I hope everybody finds their passion in the world. This is what I do when I wake up in the morning. When I wake up in the morning, I'm on my mission each and every day. 365 days, I'm either in a chat, trying to help another historian, in a debate, collaboration, or something. And I specialize, since I've been doing this, I specialize in the ancient world, before the birth of Christ. That's my specialty, because in those 8,000 years that I mentioned, 6,000 years of our history occurred before the birth of Christ. We only have 2,000 years of history since the birth of Christ. So 2/3 of our history is before anybody ever heard of the person called Christ. So I spend a lot of time in the ancient world, because in all of my books, all three of my books are written in the before the Christ era. All of my books are in that era, because, Vivian, contrary to what some people sort of think, and what they feel, before the birth of Christ, Black empires and Black nations were ruling the biblical earth. We were the movers and the shakers of civilization, and we were the developers and the fountainhead of ancient civilization, which contradicts a lot of modern scholars. A lot of modern scholars are into this thing that one group of people is better than another group of people. And I don't go into that in my books, but they are on a mission to quiet the greatness of the Blacks before the birth of Christ. And I'm on a mission to uplift these nations. So all three of my books, like I said, are in that arena. And I travel a lot. I tour a lot. But I'm always on the pulse beat of literacy with our children. Now, that is something, and that's sort of triggered to the United Way of things that you mentioned. But for the last 30 years, I am embedded in literacy for our children. I believe in it. I visit schools. I push students. I help students to get in college. And I really like to work, on the college gateway. I love to work with students who are gifted, but maybe financially struggling. They have the gift, but maybe they come from a fragile social arena or economic arena. And Vivian, I love to push those students to say, you have every right at the American dream. And just because you happen to be in a environment that your family doesn't have the social or economic means, let's try to get you on that path. So I've been on that journey for a long time, and I love working with those students and pushing them. You have every right to dream the American dream, every right. So I do a lot of different things, but my passion is history, and that's what we're probably going to talk about today. My latest book, Children of Genesis, the Black Nations in the Old Testament, is the one that's catching fire now, because that's where I go back and dispel some of the myths and the paradigms that we are not heavily involved and noticeable in the Bible. That is a falsehood. That's just something that needs to be eradicated, because in my latest book, the Black nations in the Old Testament, I dispelled that myth that we are marginalized in the Bible.
And I love that. I'm so enjoying your book.
Thank you.
I love the fact that you have such a passion for making sure that our young people are educated.
Yes.
That is how history will continue and the story will continue to go on and on. And I'm reminded, even in the Bible, in the Old Testament, God is telling them to make sure that you continue to tell this story
Yes.
to children and your grandchildren, and so that they will know. And that's how we know the truth.
The truth. Yes.
Has often been twisted and turned. And that social economic thing. So many of us that in my generation, coming from a town like Shelby,
yes,
we experienced Jim Crow,
yes,
station, but it had not been for those Black teachers.
Yes,
taught us that you are worthy and that you are somebody, and
yes,
talk about our Black history. And
yes,
reminded us, and now that is trying to be stripped
yes,
from the educational system. So for you to go out and to do this work, it takes a lot of courage to do that too, because you're speaking against, the establishment. So tell me, what is one of the most surprising and significant discoveries that you have made in some of your research?
In writing this latest book, Children of Genesis, the Black Nations in the Bible, I would say, well, let me tell you, part of my historical journey, Vivian, was I was a Sunday school teacher for 8 years, and I never could figure out why they chose me to be a Sunday school teacher. But I understand the big picture was God said, you need to be a Sunday school teacher in order to write this book that I want you to write. You have to work so hard to be a Sunday school teacher and get ready on Sunday. But Vivian, I noticed that some of the powerful empires and nations that us historians had already revealed in the ancient world began to pop up in these Sunday school lessons. And I said, I know that these are Black people. Now, I had to figure out, in the ancient world, in the old days, they had never heard of the concept of race. So that's why it's hard for some people to say, well, I can't figure out how you can figure out who's Black or whatever in the Bible. Well, the word race was only invented 500 years ago. See, people think race has been around a long time. The whole definition of race was invented by the Europeans in the 16th century to start separating people so that certain people would move up on the tier and other people would move down on the tier. So these Old Testament brilliant writers, Vivian, never heard of a concept called race. And they never wrote on anything like that. So that's why you don't pick up on it. And the other thing that they had never heard much about was skin color being a major separation tool. Because in the Old Testament, skin color was not a big thing. And people in the modern world, they tell me all the time, they had to have some kind of heavy association with skin color. And I have to tell them, no, we are born in an era when skin color is a big phenomenon. But a lot of people cannot believe a world that existed when skin color was not a big deal. So that's the two reasons why it's hard to identify who's who in the Old Testament, because they didn't write on the phenomena of skin color and race. So the only separation factor in the Old Testament era is what nation do you belong to? Because that's what separated people in addition to religion. The separations were, are you a Moabite, an Amorite, a Hittite, a Hivite, an Israelite, an Egyptian? Those are it. So on my journey, and just like you, we both grew up in the segregated world. A lot of people don't realize that we're the last generation that actually witnessed legal Jim Crow. Because, you know, we were both teenagers when they passed that civil rights bill. So we're the last people to see it live, that segregation. But I always was intrigued, you know, with my mom saying she didn't know of any blacks in the Bible or anything like that. So I just got this inkling one day. What if I research to see where we really are? So in my book, I started with the repopulation of the earth after the Great Flood, because everybody had died. And the genealogy so my book is a history book. My book is not a religious book. The book that Vivian is reading now is a history book, because I'm not on the side of the religion. That's a preacher's channel. I use the Bible because it is a massive history book. And a lot of people do not realize that in addition to the brilliant religious in the Old Testament, there is a phenomenal history in that book. So I wrote a book with three things. Who were the people in the Old Testament? What were they doing there? And who was moving civilization? Those were the three things, Vivian, that intrigued me. I stumbled across this book, Genesis chapter 10, Vivian. Genesis chapter 10 is the only chapter in the book where Noah and his three descendants are challenged and put to task by God to repopulate the earth, because God says, I've destroyed everybody. So Noah, your three sons are going to have to be the ancestors to every nation that will repopulate in the Old Testament. So I said, okay, so this must be the gateway for who's who in the Old Testament, because in Genesis 9:1 and Genesis 9:7, God specifically puts the task on those three boys. You are to be the ancestors, and your descendants must, what did he say? Multiply fruitfully, so that the earth, the biblical earth, can be recorded. So I said, if I can track these three boys, and if they are the ancestors to every nation, since everybody had been killed and destroyed, I can find out who is who. So Noah's three boys are in chapter 10, Japheth, Ham, and Shem. And Genesis chapter 10 is the only place in the Bible that you can find the birth records. And I'm talking about birth certificate records of the nations that came through the repopulation of the earth.
You know what? That is so interesting, because growing up, I can remember my dad talking about Ham.
Yes.
We were from Ham.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. So what happened, Vivian, was I started looking at those three boys, and I said, okay, if these three boys are the sons of Noah, and I had heard the stories on Ham, let me figure out who is who in these three boys. According to Jewish history, all the way back 1,000 years ago, Ham is clearly identified as the father of the Africans or the black race. Okay, so that's one of the three boys. Who are the other two boys? The other son, the first son, Japheth, in Genesis 10, is the ancestor to all of the Indo-European people, or what we consider in the modern world, the white nations, the Greeks, the Romans, and those folks. So it says, okay, well, who is this third son? This third son is the Asiatic brown-skinned father of what we call the Asiatics, which includes the Israelites, the Assyrians, the Persians, all of the people that are not in the white nations or the black nations. So those three boys are listed in Genesis 10, and all of the biblical nations that are assigned to each one of those boys are clearly identified in Genesis 10. So Genesis 10 has the 70 nations that are listed as the populating nations in the Old Testament. Okay? So I'm saying if there are 70 nations in the Old Testament, how did they split them out according to Japheth and the white race, Ham and the black nations, and Shem and the Asiatic nations? So if you read the history of Genesis 10, guess who has the most number of leading nations in the Old Testament? It's Ham. There are 30 verses in Genesis 10, this crucial chapter, 30 genealogy birth certificate records. Ham has 15 of those 30 verses dedicated just to his people. Half. And I'm going, wait a minute, how on earth did we miss this? How could Ham be the leader? So Ham is the leader according to the repopulation genealogy for the Old Testament. Japheth is the least. The Indo-Europeans are the least populated, and the Shemites, which we now call Semite people, they come in second place. So I even went to a rabbi and said, Rabbi, if y'all wrote the Old Testament and y'all are the heroes, why aren't y'all the most populated part of the nations? He says, no, it's Ham and the black nations. And so, Vivian, that triggered the writing of my book. How did they hijack all of the identities? I call it identity theft, just like we call it today. It's identity theft. How did you hijack the identities of all of these Hamite black nations and move them into becoming either white nations or brown nations? And how did you get all those pictures? How did you get all those white pictures in the Old Testament that I grew up with, and they're still in the Bible? So my book puts to task that the brilliant Old Testament writers were writing about blacks a whole lot. They were writing about black nations throughout the Old Testament. In fact, Vivian, the more I researched it, if you look at Genesis, the 2nd chapter, verses 2, 11 and 13, black nations are the first nations to even be mentioned in the Old Testament, in the Bible, period. Is Havilah and Ethiopia. These are Hamite nations. So the intriguing thing began to me was, how did we become first in the Bible when y'all taught us that we weren't even in the Bible? So who did this identity theft? The identity theft that is dominant in the world today started in the 16th century when the Europeans decided that they were going to conquer the world. They were going to move throughout the world and take over indigenous people of color. They did it in Canada, the Americas, Australia, New Zealand, all over the world. And they were going to move their concept of the Bible and their belief that they were first, because since they invented this thing called race, and since they said that we're on top of the tier of all of the races, the people have to look like us, because we can't go to Africa and call the Africans savages and barbarians and tell our people that they don't have any history if in fact they are the dominant people in history. So we got to flip the script, and we got to do this identity theft. So they couldn't change the actual word, okay, but they could play around with those pictures and translate the pictures, because as a writer, I clearly know that a picture is worth 1,000 words. I'm sitting there as an 8-year-old with my mama. I can't even read the Bible, but I know who those pictures are of Moses and David. I can see a picture even though I can't read. So they manipulated via those pictures to begin to control the written word, because no one could stop them, because they were dominating the world. And the way history works, Vivian, is history is one of the greatest management tools that we have of people. Okay. History is one of the greatest. You alter history and you put yourself in places superior, And then in our thing, when we were growing up, you have this that y'all didn't do anything other than you were just slaves, and that's all you've ever done, and you're second class. It throws the oppressed people into an awkward state while the oppressors are in a superior state. So my book is a bold attempt. It's a bold attempt to go through the scriptures and show that the Hamite nations, the black nations, Vivian, are so dominant in the Old Testament. It's really unbelievable. It really is.
Wow. So how did the Hamites,
Yes.
why were they not the conquerors? What happened with that?
Okay. The conquerors. Okay. We led the world in the ancient days for 3,000 or 4,000 continuous years. But it was so long ago that people just don't realize that it could have happened. The Indo-Europeans, the Greeks, the Romans and things, Vivian, they only woke up in the world at 1000 BC, 1000 years before the birth of Christ. If you go back and revisit what everybody is taught, the Greek civilization is first, but it only starts at 950 BC. And to the people on the podcast, don't worry, you can Google these dates. That is just 1000 years before the birth of Christ. Okay. The Romans woke up at 750 BC. That's just 750 years before the birth of Christ. The concept that I want to share is the pyramids were built 2500 BC. The pyramids are 1500 years older than any of the European nations. Okay. The pyramids were set there 1,500 years before anybody heard of a European. Now, the power of the conquerors is, well, we're so powerful. Now, once they woke up, let me give them credit. Once they woke up, they've been driving the world for the last 3,000 years. So once they woke up at 1000 BC, they've been running it for the last 3,000 years. But what the conquerors do is they say, no, wait a minute, we got to do something with these blacks in Egypt and these blacks empires. We either got to manipulate the history, delete it, or alter it, or put a firewall around it. I call it a firewall because people know in the modern world, if you work in a company, you put a firewall around your information so you protect it so it can't get out and people can't get in. So what they, in modern terminology, they built a firewall around all of those black empires to say that we'll never study them and the world will not know much about them. So we're just gonna seal them off. Okay. Then back to the pyramids, they said, we're going to get bold, Vivian. We're either going to say that the Asiatic nations or the white nations are the ones that actually drove the Europeans. So we're going to get so bold with this identity theft that we're going to move our people into ancient history where we couldn't have been. Okay. We couldn't have possibly been there, but we're going to tell the world that we were there. And we're going to do Hollywood movies on people like Moses. And we're going to make Moses to be Charlton Heston. And he's going to have this long, blonde, flowing hair. And Vivian and Ron they're going to see these movies as kids. And that's all they're going to know is this guy called the White Moses. But the biblical people, once you read Genesis 10 and you see things, you understand Moses could not have possibly been a European because Europeans weren't even, according to my book, Moses never even interacted with a European. He never saw a prominent European nation. David never interacted with a prominent European nation. Solomon didn't.
So that meant that their parents, Moses's mom,
yes,
dad,
yes,
and David's, Jesse,
yes,
knows they had to have come out of the Hamites.
No, they're Shemites. Okay, let's go to the three boys.
Okay.
The three boys, Japhet is the father of the Indo-Europeans. Ham is the father of the black us. Shem is the father of what we would call today the Browns, the Asiatic nations. Okay. So think about all of the Asiatic nations today. They've got They're the brown. They go from light brown to Hershey chocolate brown.
Exactly.
Okay. So David and all of the biblical Israelites are classified as being Asiatic browns.
And it's interesting that you say that, because even in today, this is so good. And I hope y'all are listening up, and you may have to rewind this tape and just make you some notes. Or
by the book. By the book
and invite Ronald to come and lecture with you. Because even today, it's interesting because my grandkids would come home and they would call the kids that are Latino, Mexican,
yes,
them the brown people.
That's it.
Because the Asiatic people do not consider themselves brown for the most part. Even people from India who could be anywhere from a light to, dark as midnight.
Yes.
But they are the Shemites.
They are part of the big umbrella called the Asiatics. In the biblical terms, had they been there, they would have fallen under Shem, the Shemites. Because first of all, they were not of the white nations. They were clearly not of the black nations. But this Shemite is a large array, large spectrum of skin colors and everything. Yes. So they would have been under the biblical son Shem. Yes.
So Ronald, how do we address these challenges today over the controversy that is surrounding, the race theory?
Yes.
And how do we address that?
Well, the biggest foundation that I can offer to the world, which will improve humanity, is if we get a proper understanding of history, especially ancient history, it will improve the balance of history, because the world is out of balance now because we don't understand the importance of the contributions of everybody. Okay. Everybody brought something to the table. Okay. No one group ran everything like certain people are trying to tell us today, that there's this one group. We are it. There is no one group. So this is how the history would offer us. We've tried everything, especially the blacks. We've tried everything except slowing it down and truly understanding who we were. People told us you need to go the economic route. Well, it ain't quite worked yet. You need to go the political route. Well, that didn't quite work yet. Well, civil rights is going to resolve everything for you. Something's missing there. Okay. Generation wealth, political. There is something missing since the 1965 civil rights. 60 years later, it's still not connecting. We have to go back and understand the importance of who is who and who brought what to the world. The world has to understand, before the birth of Christ, the blacks were called the genius. We were the inventors of the calendar, the wheel, astronomy. All of those things came from these black empires that you have built this firewall around, that you are so insecure to tell the world that the fountainhead of everything started with these phenomenal black races. And we are indebted to these black races for being the beginning of the civilization. And without them, the world could not have moved at the pace that it did. And the Greeks could never have done what they did. And the Romans could never have done, because geniuses never recreate the wheel. They take the wheel and make it better. So the world has got to become better secure that they are willing to tell the truth about the ancient world. The pyramids, if you look at the face of the Great Sphinx, that is clearly a black man's face with a wide nose and thick lips. Who had the architectural engineering, the genius to spend hundreds of years chiseling and carving out something 4,000 or 5,000 years before the birth of Christ, when the rest of the world had no clue what y'all were doing, and put a black man's face on it. The pyramids are in Africa.
Yes.
No matter what you say, the pyramids are in Africa.
And Egypt.
Egypt.
And people tend to forget that Egypt is in Africa.
Hey, Vivian, in my book, I have one chapter dedicated to Egypt. And I was intrigued. What did these biblical writers, who I call historians in the Old Testament, what did they say about Egypt? In my book, Vivian, 5 times they wrote in the Old Testament, Egypt is the land of Ham. They wrote it 5 different times in the Old Testament, and they were writing for us. Okay, folks, Egypt is the land of Ham. Vivian, why would they write five different times in the Bible to tell people Egypt is the land of the Hamites? It's not the land of the Shemites or the Japhites. So people want to debate. They say, well, Ron, you're stretching it. I say, well, I thought the Bible was all accurate and pure. They say, well, it is. I say, well, it's right there that they classified Egypt as the land of the blacks. But the people in the modern world are so insecure with this firewall that they cannot break the firewall down and you say, you know what? These old people, they were there. We weren't there. Why would they write that if it wasn't the truth? So I just went through the Bible, and that's just an example of how they were writing about these Hamites. 5 times they said it was us.
Wow.
So that's the essence of my book, is I go through with a historical filter and historical lenses, answering the question, who were the people? What were they doing there? And who was moving civilization? Now, Vivian, on civilization, I asked my Hebrew friends and rabbis, I know you are the heroes of the Old Testament. I know you were the writers of the whole Old Testament, and I am so indebted that you wrote it. But I have one question for you. What did you invent in the Old Testament? Were you inventors? And they say, Ron, what on earth are you talking about? I said, well, somebody had to build all of this civilization that y'all were using, because I cannot find where y'all developed any civilization, that you invented anything. I see you coming in through Abraham, and I see Abraham cruising through these countries, but y'all were using a civilization that apparently was already there.
Established.
Abraham went from Mesopotamia to Canaan. He goes from Canaan. Canaan is the 4th son of Ham, Vivian. Coincidentally, Canaan is a Hamite. Okay, so he goes to these Hamites. Then he goes to Egypt. I'm saying, okay, he went to another Hamite. Then he goes back to Canaan and spends his entire life. He never goes to a European country or anything. Abraham just centered his life among these Hamites. So I'm going, what is up with that? Why is he so intrigued with us that Abraham never interacts with European nations? See, that's how you got to look at this stuff. The legendary Abraham, he never conversed, never had a meeting with none of the Japhites, because they didn't exist.
So who would you say Abraham came from?
He's a Shemite. The Bible says he's a Shemite.
Okay.
He's a brown Asiatic.
Okay. He and Sarah?
Yes, and his wife. Yeah. The Bible, if you look at Genesis 10, he and his daddy and all of them in Genesis 10, which populates into Genesis 11, Abraham and his daddy Terah are clearly off of Shem. It says they're Shemites.
Okay.
Okay. And that's fine, Vivian, because see, here's where my book goes. The whole Old Testament is about the Hamites and the Shemites. It's not about the Japhites.
Gotcha.
Okay. The whole Old Testament is about the Hamites and the Shemites. 80%, 85% of the entire Old Testament is about the black nations and these brown nations. Now, I know you probably have heard the story that a lot of people think Moses was a black man.
Yeah.
Moses was a Shemite, but some of the Shemites were darker than me and you.
Yeah.
Some of the Shemites went down to Hershey dark chocolate. So there is a likelihood that Moses was a very dark-skinned man, but he was a Shemite because they weren't hung up on skin color, and they could, if you remember the story when he fled Egypt, when Moses killed that man, he fled Egypt and he went to Midian, and he met those 7 daughters of the man at the well. And you remember they went home and they said, the daddy said, "Why did you come home so quick?" They said, "Oh, there was this stranger at the well. He helped us with our water and he ran off the attackers that wanted to hurt us." And they said, their daddy said, "Well, who was this man?" They said, "Oh, he was just some Egyptian." They called Moses an Egyptian because of his physical look.
Mm-hmm.
He was so dark. They just assumed, okay, he said he came out of there, so we just thought he was an Egyptian. It just is a clue, since they didn't write on skin color, that he must have been very dark for them to think. Well, we know he couldn't have been a Japhite because they would have said, he would have, they said, no, he was just an Egyptian. So that's how dark some of these Shemite people were. Just like the array of blacks today. We go from light brown to burnt orange, pecan tan, Hershey chocolate, paper brown, bag brown. We got all them colors. And so today, the essence is there are no Japhite white nations talked about in the Old Testament. That's where I get the red flag. Now, wait a minute, Ron. Hold up. I said, no, I have traced those 3 boys' genealogy coming out of Genesis 10, the 3 sons of Noah. I find an array of Shemite nations, an array of Hamite nations, but y'all are in the New Testament. You're not in the Old Testament.
So what happened with Japhite then?
Japhite was the slowest. They were the slowest to become civilized. In Genesis 10, those 30 verses that I keep, that's my source document. Japheth only got 4 of the 30 verses for his people. That's how he got verses 2, 3, 4, and 5, and they were done with him.
So are you saying that his offspring,
they went north of the Mediterranean and stayed there until the New Testament days?
Okay.
Until the Greeks woke up. Until the Greeks woke up at 950 BC and the Romans at 750 BC. That's when we are introduced to the Japhites. Okay. But Abraham did not see them. Okay. Except at the Tower of Babel, when all the nations came together for a hot minute and God said, "I'm sending you away." But those biblical, Jacob, the 12 tribes, they did not see these folks. Now, here's where the conquerors, back to your thing about conquerors, the conquerors of the New World, my dear brethren, and I need them. So let me say it right here. I need all of humanity on my journey. So I can't afford to turn off any people, but I have to go to my dear brethren, the Europeans, and say, now, when y'all conquered the world and when you conquered this new world, you did alter history because that's what conquerors do. And you decided to put yourself in the Old Testament through those pictures and everything that we teach at your church when you were growing up and at my church when I was growing up. They taught that they were there and we weren't there. Okay?
Yes.
So that's the power of how a conqueror can alter history. And I mentioned history is a powerful human management tool. So what they did was they hijacked, once again, they hijacked the identities of all those Hamites, retrofitted them to make us believe it was them. And they retrofitted themselves into the Old Testament, into places that the biblical word clearly says you were not there. But that's the power. Now, if look at what people are doing today with history. They're telling us that January 6th didn't exist. But see, thank God there's video now. So you can't fool us because we saw what we saw, right? But
and you want to rewrite it, or because I want to hit on this on that in your book
Yes.
also, is that women have no place
Mm-hmm.
in religion or
Mm-hmm.
preaching, or
Yes.
that they are simply supposed to be teachers,
Yes.
or
Mm-hmm.
no place in leadership.
Right.
Leadership. But
Mm-hmm.
I think right now, in this day and time, that God is trying
Mm-hmm.
to tell us something.
Yeah.
Because in your book, you talk about the Queen of Sheba.
And the Ethiopian queens. Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Yes. Yes.
And Deborah.
Yes. And see, in my book, you mentioned the Ethiopians. My book, a third of my book is written on the term the Ethiopians in the Bible. They are the oldest nation in the Bible. It's not the country of Ethiopia. It's the ancient, powerful empire of Ethiopia. Ethiopians, they're the first nation listed in the Bible. The Queen of Sheba, the legendary Queen of Sheba, was an Ethiopian queen. She is considered the richest queen. If you look at what she gave Solomon, the largest army to be recorded in the Bible in 2 Chronicles 14 is the Ethiopian army. The Candace Queen is also in the Bible. So the Ethiopians, as an example, is one group that I highlight, Vivian. They are listed throughout the Old Testament in terms of leadership, kings, queens, royalty, commerce. They are, if you pull back the lenses on these filters and these paradigms, the Ethiopians are the highest commercial business traders in the Old Testament because they had all of the goods that Africa, all of the minerals, the gold, the precious. Africa has always been naturally embedded with all of these minerals and things that the world has always wanted. So the Ethiopians were trading gold, incense, fragrance. Egypt and Israel had no natural incense. They had no natural fragrances. They had no natural perfumes. So where were they getting all this stuff? Ethiopia was selling that stuff at high rates and making a commercial killing and just putting it in the bank. And it's in the Bible. So once again, my latest book is a filter to say, get away from these modern shifts and paradigms where people have said, we, the Europeans or whoever, we're the greatest ever in the world and nobody's greater than us. And look at what the written word actually said from the history side. Because see, I think they were brilliant historians equal to brilliant religious writers. Because for me, being an ancient historian, Vivian, with a lot of books being destroyed when conquerors burned the libraries and things like that, the history in the Bible is one of the greatest compilations that remains of these Black empires in the ancient world. The way they wrote it, it is compiled because you can't find this information in one condensed book like the Bible. We have to go to fragments and pieces of books because you're talking about stuff from 5, 6, 7, 8,000 years ago. Some of it just didn't even make it through natural disasters, hurricanes, and the paper couldn't last for 8,000 years. But the Bible, and that's why I'm indebted to them. They maintain a lot of our history in that book that we can't get our hands on. So that's why I don't know, Vivian, why God chose me to be on this mission or write these books, or this is what, you came from Cleveland School. You talked about our great teachers, and people keep saying, we're the greatest teachers that you had at A&T. I said, no, the greatest teachers I ever had in my life was from this all Black school called Cleveland School. And see, you know what I'm talking about, even though other people may not know. But I said, when I left Cleveland School, because you were able to graduate from it, I had to go through integration in high school. But the first 8 years of me going to Cleveland, I write books based on what I was taught by those Black teachers, because they taught me the gift of language. I didn't learn that in the integrated world. I learned that in the school that you and I, because they drilled in me, you got to get this reading, writing, what they call arithmetic. You're going to have to get it. So Vivian, the tools that I use came from that school. But what I was getting to is I'm on this mission. I know I've got it right. I know other than the Israelites and the Hebrews in the Old Testament, we are the greatest supporting cast of characters. If they were giving Emmys and Oscars out for the greatest supporting cast of the Old Testament, the Hamites would win all of the awards. They would win all of them. They wouldn't win the greatest actor, leading actor, because those are the Israelites. But all of that supporting stuff, we'd win all of those awards. Because back to that civilization, we built the biblical era civilization that Abraham, Jacob, Isaac, Judah, Joseph, that all of them used. If you look at it through a historian, there is no attributes of them building anything. When God gave them Canaan, he says, look, I'm going to give y'all a country and cities of which you did not build. He told them the cities are already there. I'm going to give you vineyards and fruit lands of which you did not cultivate. We are the builders of it. But Vivian, this firewall that's built by these modern scholars is super serious. They've got this stuff sealed off. That's why people are hung up on Ron DeSantis in Florida. I'm saying, y'all worried about him and them little 15 pages of history that he's in the book, when the Old Testament is 100 times more fruitful if you will go back and study it. Then Vivian, they say, well, we don't want to study ancient history. I say, well, why do you study Julius Caesar then? He was born in the era before Christ. Why do you study Socrates and Plato? They lived before Christ. They say, well, we have to study them. Oh, because the conquerors tell you have to study them. But that's ancient history. Why is there difference between that ancient history and the Hamite ancient history? Because we're I'm telling you, fifth time, this firewall, this is one of the greatest firewalls I've ever come across. But the challenge to us with over 55,000 Black churches in this country, because there's a Black church on every corner everywhere now.
Man,
how come, Vivian, the thing that I'm hung up on is, why aren't y'all picking up on this? I mean, y'all are the PhDs and all of that. How did a little old country boy from Shelby pick up on this stuff? How come y'all aren't picking up? But that's my mission if that is my mission, is to politely and respectfully open the door to show, then that's my purpose on this earth. Because I learned in Sunday school, God chooses ordinary people to do his work. You don't have to be some whatever. God picks ordinary people. And Vivian, he picks senior citizens too, because Moses was a senior citizen and Abraham. So here I am, a senior citizen. He said, I use y'all to do my work. So I just got to be submissive and be courageous, because the book, it's being analyzed, tested, but the book is holding up because I ran through where the birth records are, and I ran through Genesis 10 to identify everybody in my book, no matter what chapter you read, is retrofitted back to Genesis 10, Vivian, to see where you line up in those three boys. No, there's nobody in my book that is not retrofitted back to, because in the Bible, they retrofit you back to which one of these boys did you come from? Because God said you got to come from these three ancestry lines, or you are a Hamite, a Shemite, or a Japhite. So everybody in my book is listed, and I can't find the Japhites in the Old Testament. We're not giving up, because there's a few of them in there, but they're not prominent nations. They are not the movers and the shakers. In the New Testament, they are the absolute movers and the shakers. So, Vivian, that's the mission that I'm on. It's a prayerful mission. It's a prayerful mission.
And and it's a great mission. It is a great mission. God has appointed people. I think it's in Jeremiah. He was speaking to Israel, telling them that he knew the plans that he had for them. But we can apply that to ourselves also, because all of us have a unique purpose in this life.
Yes.
Now,
Yes.
I just finished reading this book, and this book kept coming up to me over and over again. Jesus and the Disinherited
Okay.
by Howard Thurman.
Okay.
Great book. Book written in 1949.
Gotcha.
And it is just as applicable today as it was then.
Mhm.
He was a mentor to many of the civil rights leaders and to Martin Luther King. They say Dr. Martin Luther King would not even leave home without that book
Okay.
in his suitcase. But Dr. Thurman is saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Because in the New Testament, that is when the Japhites
Yes.
dominant, and Jesus was dominated also by the Greek
Yes.
and the Romans.
Yes.
Okay, so
Yes.
he was one of the disinherited also.
Mhm.
But I tell you, the thing for me is that we have got to get into the Word of God. He said that nations and everything would go to ruin, but His Word would
Yes.
never. And so I thank you. It's a pleasure, but it's also a burden.
It's work. It's work.
So this is a great work.
Yes.
So I would ask you, what would be the three things that you would want our listeners
Okay.
to take away from this today?
Okay. The first one would be God was too good of a father to leave some of his children out of the Bible. Okay. He's too great of a God to have marginalized some of his children.
Yes.
Okay. So the whole paradigm shift that God left us out of the Bible, okay, is a falsehood. Okay. The second thing would be a challenge to our people, the Hamite descendants. Just wonder how much better we would feel culturally, self-esteem, if we went through the Bible and started reading, oh, wait a minute, these are us. These are blacks. When they're preaching on Sunday, in your mind, you say, oh, he's preaching on us. Okay, how much self-esteem would we increase by if we could study the Bible historically and realize that we are some of the major players, okay, the major players in the Old Testament, okay? And the third thing, with our children, our youth feeling so awkward because of this mismanagement of information, where they're always feeling in schools marginalized and left out. Wonder what would happen if our youth picked up on, wait a minute, the Bible was written about us. You know, maybe we ought to go to church. I didn't know they were talking about us. So we're trying to figure out how to get them back in the church. What if you told them, you know what? We're going to start talking about us in the Bible. And would that make you come back? Because our youth are looking for something different in the Bible.
Yeah.
It's already written there.
Yeah.
Okay. It's already, the Bible is so great. Vivian, I can't imagine that God is sitting up there saying, look, black folks, I wrote about y'all 2,000 years ago. All y'all got to do is read it. Come on. It's in the Bible. Do I have to come down there and read it for you too? It's in there. Quit letting them tell you what I wrote and really understand what I really wrote. And in summation, Vivian, he would say, I would never leave y'all out of the Bible. I would never do that. I have been with y'all. That's why I can hear God saying, that's why y'all so resilient now. I've always been with you. I have always been with you. That's why no matter what they have done to you, you've been able to take it and come back strong. And his message is, I've never left you out. I have always been with you. So read my word and pick it up. And don't make me have to come down there.
And shake you.
And shake y'all up. Come on, people.
This is so wonderful, because the thing is, if you don't know where you came from,
right,
you won't know where you're going.
And you're easily manipulated.
Yes. And I think that that has happened so much
Yes. Yes.
in this society. And it's
Yes.
time for us to step up and take right leadership.
And empower ourselves
Yes.
to do. And see, this is what the rabbi told me. I forgot to tell you. When I went to talk to the rabbi, he said, Ron, y'all just don't do critical thinking on the Bible. Y'all just read things. And Vivian, he told me that 10 years ago. It took me 8 years to catch up with what the rabbi was saying. He said, y'all just read stuff and y'all just run with it. You never ask critical questions on it. He says, it's like, y'all afraid. He says, and this is the challenge to our folks. Answer those 3 questions that I gave you. Who were the people? What were they doing there? And who was moving civilization? Don't be afraid to do critical thinking. You're not challenging God. You just, what did he really write? And who put these white pictures in the Bible like this? And see, my whole point is, as a writer, the words and the pictures don't match. And as a writer, I can tell you, any writer will tell you, you will give us heartburn if we write about one set of characters and you hijack them and make them a different set of characters. Oh, you have hurt our feelings. If those Old Testament writers came back here today and saw those pictures in the Old Testament, they would have no idea what that was. We didn't. I can hear him saying, "Ron, that ain't who we wrote on, brother." No.
Wow.
So that is the challenge: is critical thinking to empower yourself to better yourself.
Wow, this has just been so wonderful. And listening audience out there, I just hope that this has opened you up to challenge, even challenge your church members or your pastor, and ask those critical questions. But I tell you what, God is doing an amazing thing because he brought his brother here today, and you can have him to come and to share even more information with you and do some classes and do some workshops in your churches and in your community settings. Do this even outside of the church. So you got clubs, organizations. Have him in as a guest speaker. He's available, I think.
Yes, I am. Yes. And that's
copy here, even sign your book for you.
If you'll go to my website, all of my books are there, and how to get in touch with me, it's www.ronharrill.com, ronharrill.com. And I'll give you my email, please, because it's my name, Ron, the first initial RHARRILL 50 at AOL.com. And my books can be purchased right off of my website. You just hit the icon, it takes you straight to the Amazon or Barnes & Noble link. It just takes you straight. You just hit it and you just go straight to the purchase page. But I look forward to hearing. And Vivian, as an old school, see, y'all just don't understand the importance of, we went to the same school at the same time.
Yes. And there are so many of us that stay connected.
Yes.
And I tell you what, there are a lot of historians that have come out or keep our history going of the Black people in Shelby.
Yes.
That keep
we're proud.
Yeah.
We're humble, but we're proud.
Tigers. Yes, yes. And I am just so excited, brother, for the work that you're doing, and that the information that you're sharing with the people out here, because this is the time.
Yes.
These are critical times, because when people can just come up and say, oh yeah, well, we just made that up. We're just making up stuff. And so truth, and we've talked about truth many times on this podcast, there's only one truth. We can't have your truth and my truth. So there's one truth. And teaching our kids critical thinking.
Critical thinking.
So important.
Mhm.
They're on TikTok,
Mhm.
YouTube, and all of these other platforms that
Mhm.
will, and now we've got AI that has
Yes.
come on board. So,
Mhm.
what is truth? And I'm
Mhm.
reminded of Pilate
Mhm.
asking Jesus,
Mhm.
what is truth?
Yes.
And it is already planted right there for you,
Mhm.
the Word of God. Thank you
It's
so much, my brother.
it's a history book. So you got to think of it. It's a multi-purpose book.
Yes,
It's a multi-purpose book.
that will still be around. It's the what is still the number one bestseller.
Yes, of all time, of all time, all time, all
Yes,
time.
yes.
And and I'm glad you said that. The number one best-selling book of all time. And here we are. Hamites are the greatest supporting cast members in the all-time greatest selling book, and we're right in the middle of it.
Well, it reminds me, and I guess we can wind our time down now,
Yeah,
but it reminds me of an old song that we came up with by James Brown. I'm black and I'm proud.
I hear you.
Say it loud. I'm black and I'm proud. And if you ever get a chance to visit the motherland and go
Mm-hmm.
to Egypt and to be able to visit the pyramids and
Mm-hmm.
see the Sphinx, I'm telling
Yes.
you, you're going to be
Mm-hmm.
absolutely
Mm-hmm.
amazed. Amazed. Well, thank you so much, my brother, for joining us
Okay.
today. And
Okay.
I just blessings to you and to
Okay.
your family and to the great work that you're done. And
Okay.
since you're a senior citizen now, you got a little bit more time on your hands to do this work and to produce more books. So
Thank you.
we talked a little bit about your poetry. So is any of your poetry published?
I was sitting at a funeral yesterday thinking about my poetry. I have about 200, maybe close to 300 poems, Vivian. I wrote them in the 1980s,
Wow.
and I dated every one of them. And I wrote them in the whole decade. I have a stack, 200 or 300. I was in a different mindset in the 1980s, but I wrote some really serious poems in the 1980s. And I think it's time for me to go back through those poems and sift out 50, 60, 80, 100 of them and publish them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because some of them I wrote and I was in some pretty good moods and all kind of moods, but it's like Motown Records. They don't change. Just go ahead and publish it. So Vivian, I think it's time for me to go back, sift through those poems because they're sitting right here on the shelf right behind me right now. And I don't think I'm gonna edit them. I'm just gonna let them go with the way I felt in the 1980s and bring them out.
See what we've done? We've inspired him.
Yeah.
We've inspired
So
him to publish even more.
I think because they're just sitting there. And mhm,
So, Ron,
yes,
we did mention the book, Children of Genesis,
yes.
did not mention the names of your other two books.
If I this one, if I can hold it up,
Mhm.
this is a children's book. If I can hold it up, Makeda, the Queen of Sheba. This book is the one, Vivian, that won first place in a prestigious international book award. So this book is my second book. I would advocate for anyone who's looking for a biblical based, moral based, cultural based, really good book for children up to the age of 14, 15. This
Great.
book is also on my website. I would encourage you, the Queen of Sheba. There's hardly any people in the world that has not heard the term the Queen of Sheba. So this book is a strong competitor to my new book. This book is clearly telling my new book, I'm just as good as you are. Okay, so this book's not giving up. This is my first book. It's also on an African queen. It's on the Queen of Sheba too. So I've actually written two books on, that's how strong the Queen of Sheba is. So this book and this book are the same. So buy this one because what I did was I redid the first book into a bigger, better version. So these are the two now that I'm selling on the website. But I would encourage you for children, Sunday schools, that some Sunday schools are using this because she is legendary and recorded in the Bible going to see Solomon. So she is the only queen, Vivian, that is recorded in the Old Testament, the New Testament, the teachings of Jesus, and the Quran. She's the only queen that made all four of those dynamics.
Wow.
No other queen made it. So thank you so much. And once again, just go to my website, ronharrill.com. Click on the icons. You can buy them. But I hope to get some feedback. And Vivian, I hope maybe we can do something else again.
Absolutely. Well, again, thank you for joining in and listening today. We look for your comments.
Okay.
You talk to Ron. You got his email. You have his website. Make sure that you support him.
Thank you so much.
Getting these books and reading, educating yourself, and sharing this with others. If you've enjoyed this episode today, make sure that you share it with others out there. And until the next time, as always, peace.
God bless everybody. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. The best gift that you could give me is to share this podcast with family and friends. And don't forget to review it. That way, this podcast will grow organically. If you need to reach out to me, please check out my Facebook page, DM me there, or you can email me at godskow@gmail.com. We have upcoming Bible studies that we would love for you to join us in, or if there is a guest or someone that you would like to see me interview on this podcast, please let me know. We are here to work together to realign our lives. Until the next episode, take care, and I look forward to sharing more and more with you as we realign our lives. Peace until next week.